Every empire built monuments to its power, pyramids, palaces, statues carved in marble and gold, built to outlast the men who ordered them. But behind every throne, in the most private room of the palace, the world's most powerful people, obsessed over something far more hidden, the inside of their own bodies. Not their armies, not their wealth, their digestion guarded, studied, and feared for 3,000 years. This is the hidden ritual that connected pharaohs to kings, priests to physicians, separated by oceans and centuries but bound by one obsession. A secret history written in medical scrolls and royal diaries, never carved into statues, never spoken of in public, yet shaping empires from the inside out. Physicians who held the most intimate access to a god-king's body, court doctors who tracked a queen's every cycle, like a matter of national security. This is the one secret history forgot to put on a plaque. And it starts on the banks of the Nile. 3,500 years ago, in ancient Egypt, the body was a vessel for the divine. The pharaoh wasn't just a ruler, he was a living god, and the god's body had to remain pure. Around 1550 BCE, physicians compiled the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts in human history. Among its many remedies, one treatment appears again and again: the enema, not as an embarrassment, as medicine, as maintenance for the divine machine that kept a kingdom standing. This belief gave rise to one of the strangest job titles in recorded history. A royal physician named Eri held a title that translates roughly to shepherd of the anus. To us, it sounds like an insult.
Be purified.
To the Egyptians, it was prestige. His tomb inscriptions listed proudly among his greatest achievements, proof that this was not shame, but status. Eri's role was to protect the pharaoh from impurity, because if the god-king's body failed, the Egyptians believed the kingdom itself was at risk. Disease wasn't just illness, it was disorder. And disorder, in a civilization built on cosmic balance, was the most dangerous thing imaginable. Priests and physicians studied digestion the way modern doctors study the heart. They believed a substance called wekidu, a kind of decay, a rot, could spread from the bowels into the rest of the body.
This carving
poisoning it from
reveals
within,
the chief
corrupting
physician's
a sacred
title.
vessel one organ at a time.
He was a master
So
of the
cure
healing
became
arts.
ceremony. Gold vessels, careful rituals. Physicians trained for years to earn the right to treat a king's most private system. In Egypt, this wasn't a joke whispered behind closed doors. It was sacred work, performed in service of a god who happened to also rule an empire. 3,500 years later, an ocean and a civilization away, another set of rulers would inherit the same obsession, though for very different reasons. Centuries later, in Rome, the obsession took a darker turn. Where Egypt saw purity, Rome saw indulgence. The empire's elite, emperors like Augustus and Claudius among them, lived inside a culture of excess, where banquets could stretch for hours and courses never seemed to end. To keep feasting, the body had to be empty. Physicians of the era prescribed purges and enemas, not for health, but for appetite. A blocked body was a wasted opportunity, a pleasure left unfinished. Popular accounts of Roman excess gave rise to a myth that still circulates today: the vomitorium, imagined as a room where guests purged themselves mid-feast so they could keep eating. Historians now know the word actually described an exit passage in an amphitheater. Nothing to do with vomiting at all. But the myth survived because it felt true. It captured something real about a civilization that treated the body not as sacred, but as a machine for pleasure, one that could simply be reset again and again in service of more. Where Egypt purified the body for the gods, Rome emptied it for the table. The ritual hadn't changed, only the reason had. And soon, in a colder climate across the sea, the reason would shift again, this time toward the soul. By the 1500s, in the cold stone halls of Tudor England, the obsession changed shape again. For Queen Elizabeth I and her court, the body wasn't divine, and it wasn't decadent. It was a mirror of the soul. Tudor physicians kept meticulous records of the Queen's digestive cycle, because to them, regularity was virtue. A clean body signaled a clean conscience, untouched by sin, untouched by weakness. Elizabeth relied on natural purgatives to maintain what her court called vigor, the stamina to rule a kingdom through plots, wars, and decades on a throne that many believed a woman shouldn't hold. Every cough, every ailment, every irregularity was watched, recorded, and whispered about, because a queen's body was never just her own. In an age obsessed with appearances of piety, even her bowels became a kind of political statement, proof to a suspicious court that the body beneath the crown was disciplined, controlled, and pure. Three different civilizations, three completely different reasons: sacred, decadent, virtuous. And yet the ritual itself never changed. It would take one more court, the most extravagant in European history, to turn this same private act into the most public performance of power the world had ever seen. Then came the era that turned a medical necessity into the most fashionable ritual in Europe. In 17th century France, the enema, known then
Surely, madame, the
as
timing of the announcement is curious. Oh, entirely intentional,
daily
I assure you.
obsession for
He
the
seeks to
nobility
overshadow
of
the Cardinal's
Versailles.
reception. A petition,
At the
Your
center
Majesty.
of it was King Louis XIV.
We must ensure the
Sun
delegation is
King,
ready by
the most
noon.
powerful monarch in Europe. According to the records kept by his personal physicians, Louis received thousands of these treatments over the course of his reign, and he didn't hide it.
A marvelous
By some
evening, wouldn't you
accounts,
agree?
he
To the
held
finest court in
while
all of Europe.
receiving one.
Indeed.
Continuing
The music is
conversations
simply
of state,
divine.
as if nothing unusual were happening at all, in a court built entirely on appearances, where every gesture was a performance of power. Even this became theater. A king so secure in his authority that nothing, not even this, needed to be concealed. If anything, the openness was the point. It said, I have nothing to hide because nothing can touch me. And because Louis did it, the entire court followed. It became aristocratic fashion. Nobles commissioned clyster syringes crafted from gold and silver, ornate enough to display rather than hide. They were carried to parties like jewelry, shown off in private salons, talked about the way we talk about the newest supplement, the latest cleanse, the most expensive wellness routine. It's a strange image to sit with the man who built the Hall of Mirrors, who commanded the most powerful nation on earth, submitting to a daily ritual most of us would consider deeply private, and turning it into a flex, a symbol not of weakness but of refinement. For the nobility watching, status wasn't just measured in land or titles anymore. It was measured in how openly, how elegantly, how fashionably you could perform even your most private rituals. The body had become the ultimate stage. And at Versailles, every stage existed for one reason only: to prove who held the power. But no fashion lasts forever. And the very openness that made this ritual a symbol of confidence would soon make it a symbol of something else entirely: absurdity. But fashions fade, and so do medical fads. As the Enlightenment took hold in the 1700s, science began replacing superstition. Physicians started questioning the old belief that the bowels controlled the body's destiny, the soul's purity, or a kingdom's fate. The clyster, once a symbol of refinement, slowly became a punchline, mocked in plays, caricatured in cartoons, a relic of an era that took itself far too seriously. Pamphlets ridiculed the nobility, who once
The evidence presented here clearly contradicts your premise on human nature.
Evidence cannot account for the corruption of the soul, my friend.
Look to the colonies for proof.
Aristocratic excess in Rome, moral virtue in Tudor England, and fashionable status in France became, almost overnight, an absurdity. The same act across four civilizations had carried four completely different meanings: sacred, decadent, virtuous, fashionable, and then, finally, a joke. Medicine. Science found better explanations for the body's inner workings, but the pattern it left behind, the idea that power and the body are never truly separated, never really disappeared. It just stopped being performed in public. From the banks of the Nile to the mirrored halls of Versailles, the world's most powerful rulers lived by the same hidden belief, that the state of the empire was reflected in the state of the ruler's body. It began with Eri, the Pharaoh's shepherd of the anus, guarding the purity of a living god. 3,000 years later, a king of France turned the same ritual into theater for an entire court. Different gods, different crown, different centuries, but the same conviction echoing across all of human history, that control over the body is the first proof of control over everything else. And maybe it never really left us. Look closely at today's wellness rituals, cleanses and supplements, and you'll find the same instinct, just rebranded. Power, it turns out, has always started somewhere